Do you even know who you're talking to? The words echoed through the room, sharp and cutting, slicing through the low murmur of conversation. It was a question meant to humiliate, to remind the server of her place. Bradley Turner, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, leaned back in his chair, the very picture of power. His sharp suit and cold eyes commanded attention as always. He smiled, his teeth gleaming like a predator spotting easy prey. You're just a waitress, sweetheart. I don't think you understand how important this meeting is. Tiffany Walker stood there, tray in hand, her body stiff with the weight of the insult. The room seemed to freeze, the other guests awkwardly glancing between the two. Tiffany didn't flinch. She had heard it all before. The whispers, the dismissive glances, the snide comments. But tonight something was different. This time she wasn't going to back down. Tiffany had been working at the Veritas Lounge for nearly 3 years, but she had never been truly seen. She had learned to keep her head down, to smile when spoken to, and to serve the guests without a word of complaint. It was the unspoken rule of being a black woman in a high-end restaurant. You serve, you stay quiet, and you don't challenge the powerful. But Tiffany wasn't just any waitress. She had a story. One that wasn't meant for the rich and powerful to understand. A story about family, legacy, and the undeniable force of nature that ran through her veins. As Bradley's words hung in the air, Tiffany's eyes locked with his. There was no fear in her gaze, no submission. She didn't bow to the weight of his power. Instead, she straightened up, her posture becoming one of quiet defiance. That's my dad's signature, she said, her voice steady. Bradley froze. The glass of wine in his hand wavered for a moment before it slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. The room went silent. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of voices, everything stopped. Tiffany stood still, watching as Bradley's face slowly shifted from arrogance to confusion, then to disbelief. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. The power dynamics in the room had shifted, and he could no longer control the narrative. The realization hit him like a slap. Tiffany wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just a woman serving food to the elite. She was the daughter of a man who had once been a key player in the very company he now ran. A man whose legacy Bradley had never acknowledged, whose signature had once been part of the deal that made Bradley a billionaire. Tiffany had grown up hearing stories about her father's contributions to the tech world, but those stories were never told in the boardrooms where the real decisions were made. They were never told to the people who mattered. She had always been invisible, relegated to the back of the room, serving the men who thought they owned the world. But tonight Tiffany was taking her place. The room was still silent, the tension palpable. Bradley blinked, trying to process what had just happened. He had been so sure of his power, so certain that no one would ever dare to challenge him. And yet here was Tiffany, a woman he had dismissed without a second thought, standing in front of him, forcing him to confront a past he had long buried. I don't think you remember my father, Tiffany continued, her voice cold, but with a tinge of something deeper, something stronger than any wealth or influence Bradley could ever have. But I remember everything. Bradley's face reddened as the weight of the moment settled in. He had been wrong. So wrong. And in that moment, Tiffany had not only made him acknowledge her, but she had made him question everything he thought he knew about power. The room remained still, the tension hanging thick in the air as everyone waited for Bradley's response. Would he admit his mistake? Would he recognize the woman he had so easily dismissed as someone of worth? Or would he continue to ignore her, to treat her like the invisible servant he had always assumed she was? The room remained frozen, a heavy silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Bradley Turner stood motionless, his hand still hovering above the broken glass on the floor, eyes wide in disbelief. Tiffany Walker, standing just a few feet away, kept her composure, her gaze unblinking. For a brief moment it felt like time had stopped, as though the weight of what had just been said hung in the air, too massive to be ignored. Bradley's mind raced, trying to process the revelation. He had never thought to connect Tiffany to the past, to the man who had helped build the foundation of the very company he now controlled. The arrogance that had once defined him seemed to crumble under the force of her words. Tiffany's heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained an impenetrable mask. She had expected shock, maybe even anger, but not this. She hadn't expected Bradley to be so visibly rattled. For so long she had lived in the shadow of others, her talents and her heritage dismissed because of her race, because of her place in the world. But tonight, everything had changed. Tiffany wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for her father, for the legacy that had been ignored for too long. The silence lingered, but Tiffany knew she couldn't wait forever for Bradley to recover. She took a step forward, her voice calm but firm. "You don't remember, do you? My father was there from the beginning, before all the fame and fortune. He helped build this empire, but he was never recognized for it. All these years you've had your name in lights, but his work was swept under the rug." Bradley's face flushed a deep shade of red. He opened his mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. This wasn't how he had imagined the night going. He had come here to seal a deal, to further his legacy, but now he was facing something far more uncomfortable. "I know who you are," Tiffany continued, her tone unwavering. "I know what you've done to people like my father. You used him and then you pushed him aside. He was your partner, Bradley, but you turned your back on him when he no longer fit into your plans." The room remained silent, every eye now on Bradley, waiting for his response. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure, but the words he had been ready to speak seemed to escape him. I didn't know," he muttered, though it sounded like an excuse rather than an apology. Tiffany looked at him, her expression softening just a fraction. She wasn't interested in his apologies, not anymore. "It doesn't matter now," she said, her voice low but powerful. "What matters is that you know. You know the truth. And maybe now you'll start to understand what real power is." She turned to walk away, the sound of her heels clicking against the polished floor echoing in the stillness of the room. As she reached the door, she paused for just a moment, looking back over her shoulder. "I don't need your recognition, Bradley. I've already got everything I need." With that, she stepped out, leaving the room behind her to unravel the weight of her words. Bradley stood there for a long time, staring at the broken glass, unable to shake the feeling that everything he had built, everything he had worked for, was now in question. He had spent so long fighting to maintain control, to be the one in charge, that he had never stopped to consider who he was stepping on to get there. Tiffany had made him realize something he had never thought about before. Power wasn't just about wealth or influence. It was about respect, about acknowledging the people who helped you along the way. And in that moment, Bradley understood just how much he had taken for granted. The next few days were a whirlwind for Tiffany. She returned to her usual routine, working at the restaurant, but something had shifted in the air. People looked at her differently, as if the veil of invisibility she had worn for so long had been lifted. Bradley Turner's name had been mentioned more than once in the hallways of Veritas Lounge. Whispers spread like wildfire, and for the first time in her life, Tiffany felt like she wasn't just a bystander in her own story. She wasn't just the woman who served drinks and took orders. She was someone who had made a difference, who had shaken the very foundation of power in that room. But Tiffany didn't let the attention go to her head. She wasn't there for recognition. She had done what she needed to do for herself and for her father. She had taken a stand, and that was enough. Bradley, on the other hand, had not been able to move on so easily. The days after the dinner had been long and uncomfortable for him. He tried to bury his thoughts, to go back to business as usual, but every time he picked up a pen or signed a contract, her words echoed in his mind. "That's my dad's signature." The weight of what he had ignored for so long weighed heavily on him. He knew he couldn't just let it go. Tiffany had made him see something that he hadn't wanted to acknowledge. For years, he had thought of himself as the one who had earned everything, that he had worked his way to the top by sheer merit. But now he couldn't ignore the fact that there had been others, people like Tiffany's father, who had helped pave the way, only to be discarded when they were no longer useful. Bradley had been dismissive, arrogant, and blind to the very foundations of his success. It wasn't just his business practices that were under scrutiny now. It was his character. Tiffany had made him question everything. He knew he needed to do something about it. After a few days of reflecting on the events that had unfolded, Bradley reached out to Tiffany. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew he had to make things right. He wasn't sure how, but he couldn't just let this moment pass without trying to mend the damage he had done. He called the restaurant asking to speak with her. When Tiffany received the call, she was caught off guard. She had expected to never hear from him again. But there he was on the other end of the line sounding different. He apologized. The words felt awkward, clumsy even, but they were real. "Tiffany, I owe you an apology," Bradley said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I was wrong. I should have recognized the value of your father's work a long time ago. I dismissed you, and for that, I'm truly sorry." Tiffany paused, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the counter. She had prepared herself for this moment, but hearing the sincerity in his voice made it real. "I'm not looking for an apology, Bradley," she replied, her voice steady. "I didn't do what I did for you to say sorry. I did it because it was the right thing to do." There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Bradley spoke again. "I know, but I need to do something more. I want to make it right, to honor your father's legacy. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'm ready to take the steps to change things. Not just for you, but for everyone who's been overlooked." Tiffany was silent for a moment, considering his words. She wasn't sure if he could really change, if this was just another attempt to save face. But deep down, something told her that Bradley wasn't the same man who had dismissed her so easily. "I don't need your charity, Bradley," she finally said. "But if you truly mean what you say, then prove it. Prove that you can be better than the man you were." Bradley nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I will," he said, determination in his voice. "I'll start by making sure your father's contributions are recognized, and I'll make sure no one else gets left behind like he was. I promise." Tiffany felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't the kind of change she had expected, but it was a start. And sometimes that was all it took. As she hung up the phone, she looked out the window, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. Things weren't perfect and there was still much work to be done, but for the first time in a long while, Tiffany felt like she was finally in control of her own story. Weeks passed, and the city seemed to settle back into its usual rhythm. Tiffany still worked her shifts at Veritas Lounge, but now there was an air of quiet pride about her. The whispers that had once followed her like a shadow had transformed into something else. Admiration, respect, even curiosity. People began to see her differently. Bradley Turner had kept his word. He had made sure her father's contributions were acknowledged, bringing his legacy to the forefront in ways Tiffany never expected. He even went so far as to feature her father's name in a memorial in the company's headquarters, a public gesture that caught the attention of the media. But it wasn't just the public recognition that changed things for Tiffany. Behind the scenes, Bradley had proven himself in other ways. He'd made efforts to change the culture of his company, pushing for more diversity, more opportunities for people who had been overlooked, just like her father had been. Tiffany didn't know if she could ever fully trust him, but she couldn't deny the changes he was trying to make. One afternoon, as she was serving a table near the back of the restaurant, Tiffany felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned around to find Bradley standing there, his suit neatly pressed, his expression more relaxed than she had ever seen it. "Got a minute?" he asked, his voice warm but tentative. Tiffany raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this conversation was heading. "What's going on?" she asked, crossing her arms. Bradley looked around, his eyes scanning the room before focusing back on her. "I wanted to talk to you about something," he said, pausing as if weighing his words. "I know things have changed and I wanted to thank you for what you did, for standing up to me." Tiffany nodded, not really sure what else to say. She had already moved past it in her mind. "It wasn't just about you," she replied. "It was about my father. About doing what was right." Bradley hesitated for a moment before speaking again, his voice quieter now. "I know, and that's why I wanted to ask if you would consider coming to work for me. I'm starting a new project, and I think you'd be perfect for it." Tiffany's eyes narrowed as she studied him. "Work for you? In what capacity?" she asked, skepticism evident in her tone. Bradley smiled, as if he knew exactly what she was thinking. "I know I don't have the best track record, but I'm trying to change that. I'm working on a new initiative, and I need someone who understands the value of hard work, someone who doesn't just see the surface. I want you to be a part of it." Tiffany remained silent, her mind racing. She had never imagined that Bradley would offer her a job, let alone one that would place her in a position of power. She wasn't sure if she could trust him completely yet, but the idea of making real change from the inside was tempting. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice steady. Bradley nodded, a look of relief washing over his face. "Take your time. I know it's a big decision, but I think it could be a chance for you to do something that matters." Tiffany turned away, going back to her duties, but the offer hung in the air like a question she wasn't sure how to answer. She had spent so many years working in the shadows, never asking for anything more than respect. But now here was a chance to step into the light, to make a difference in a way she had never dreamed possible. She didn't know if she could trust Bradley completely, but one thing was clear. The world was changing, and maybe, just maybe, she was a part of that change. As the evening wore on, Tiffany couldn't shake the feeling that something big was on the horizon. It wasn't just about the recognition or the job offer. It was about the power to change things, to shape her future in ways she had never allowed herself to believe. The ball was in her court now, and she was ready to make her move. It had been a few days since Bradley made his offer to Tiffany, and she had spent every moment contemplating it. The decision weighed heavily on her, far more than she had expected. She had worked at Veritas Lounge for so long, a place where she was accustomed to staying behind the scenes, unnoticed by the high-powered clientele. But now she was facing the chance to step into the world she had always been kept out of, to sit at a table where decisions were made, where her voice could actually be heard. The offer to join Bradley's new project lingered in her mind, like an opportunity she could never have imagined just a few months ago. She had heard stories of people who had used their positions for good, people who had turned their lives around and made a real difference in the world. But she had also seen how power could corrupt, how those in control could manipulate and use others to further their own agendas. Tiffany wasn't naive. She knew the risks. As much as she admired Bradley's recent efforts to change, she couldn't ignore the past, the dismissiveness, the arrogance, the way he had brushed her aside until the truth about her father had forced him to face reality. She had spent so many years proving her worth to people who had never bothered to look beneath the surface. And now here she was, being offered a chance to sit at the table with the very people who had once underestimated her. The idea was tempting, but she was torn. Could she really trust Bradley to keep his word? Could she believe that his intentions were genuine? Or was this just another way for him to redeem himself? In front of the public? Tiffany had always believed in standing on her own 2 feet, in making her own way, no matter how difficult it was. But this time the offer was different. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about opportunity. She knew she couldn't make this decision alone. She needed to talk to someone who had always supported her, someone who had known her when she was just a girl with big dreams. Her grandmother. Tiffany hadn't seen her grandmother in weeks, but she called her that afternoon and invited her over for tea. Her grandmother, as always, was full of wisdom. "So what's this about you working for that Bradley fellow?" her grandmother asked, her voice steady with curiosity. Tiffany took a deep breath. "He offered me a job, a chance to help him with a new project, something that could make a real difference, but I'm not sure if I can trust him." Her grandmother looked at her with knowing eyes, eyes that had seen decades of life, struggle, and change. "Tiffany, you've got something that a lot of people don't. You've got heart. You know what's right and you know what's wrong. Whatever you decide, make sure it's because you believe in it, not because you're doing it for anyone else." Tiffany nodded, taking in her grandmother's words. She had always been the voice of reason in her life, the one who reminded her to stay true to herself, no matter what. "I don't want to make the same mistake again," Tiffany said softly. "I don't want to trust the wrong person, only to be let down." Her grandmother smiled gently, reaching out to take her hand. "The world will always test you, child. But you've got the strength to handle it. Trust your heart, and everything else will follow." That evening, Tiffany stood by the window in her small apartment, looking out at the city. The lights from the high-rises twinkled in the distance, like a reminder of everything she had once dreamed of. She had come so far, but now she had to decide what the next chapter would look like. It wasn't just about Bradley or his project. It was about her future, about creating a life that mattered, not just for herself, but for those who had been overlooked, for those who had been told they didn't belong. Tiffany knew she couldn't do it alone. But maybe, just maybe, this was the opportunity she had been waiting for. As the night grew quiet, she made her decision. She would accept Bradley's offer, but on her terms. She would be there to ensure that things changed, that people like her father, like herself, would no longer be pushed aside. This was her moment to take control of her own destiny, and she wasn't going to waste it. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Tiffany. She officially started working with Bradley on his new initiative, the project that promised to bring change to the very culture of the company. Bradley had kept his word, giving Tiffany a seat at the table, not just as a token employee, but as someone who would help shape the future of the organization. It wasn't easy. She had to prove herself every day. But for the first time, Tiffany felt like her voice mattered. She wasn't just a waitress or a forgotten daughter. She was someone who could make a difference. As the days passed, Bradley's transformation became more evident. He was really trying to change the way things were done. He opened up more opportunities for people from diverse backgrounds, started mentoring employees from underrepresented groups, and ensured that no one would be overlooked again. Tiffany didn't expect him to be perfect, but she saw his efforts and felt that, perhaps, his intentions were genuine. Still, there were moments when she felt uneasy. She would catch Bradley in meetings, laughing and joking with the very people who had once treated her like she was invisible. It was hard not to wonder if things had really changed, or if he was simply trying to change his image for the public. But Tiffany wasn't there to hold his hand or to soothe his conscience. She was there to make sure that the work was being done, that real lasting change was happening. One afternoon, as she was reviewing some reports in her office, Bradley walked in. His face was serious, but there was something different in his demeanor. "Tiffany, I need to talk to you about something," he said, closing the door behind him. Tiffany looked up, sensing the weight in his voice. "What's going on?" she asked. Bradley hesitated before sitting down across from her. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about the changes we're making and the direction we're heading. And I wanted to ask for your honest opinion. Do you think we're doing enough?" Tiffany leaned back in her chair, considering his question carefully. She knew this wasn't just a formality. Bradley truly wanted to know if he was on the right track. "I think you're making progress," she said, her voice steady. "But progress doesn't mean everything is fixed. You can't change a company's culture overnight. It takes time and it takes consistent effort. The work you're doing is good, but it needs to go deeper." Bradley nodded, his brow furrowing slightly. "I know. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing it for the right reasons, or if I'm just trying to make up for my past mistakes." Tiffany felt a pang of sympathy for him. Despite his flaws, she knew that Bradley wasn't a bad person. He had simply made mistakes, and now he was trying to make things right. "It's not about making up for mistakes," Tiffany said, her voice softening. "It's about doing what's right, moving forward, and making sure you don't repeat the same mistakes. You can't change the past, but you can shape the future." Bradley's eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was a quiet understanding between them. "I want to keep doing this," he said, his voice earnest. "Not just for me, but for everyone who's been overlooked like you and your father. I don't want to just be the CEO. I want to be someone who actually makes a difference." Tiffany smiled, a small knowing smile. "You're getting there," she said, her tone approving. "But just remember, it's not about one big gesture or public apology. It's about the little things, the day-to-day actions that show you're committed to real change." Bradley nodded, a look of determination in his eyes. "I'm in this for the long haul," he said, his voice firm. Tiffany stood up, extending her hand to him. "Good," she said, her smile widening. "Then let's get to work." As she watched Bradley leave her office, Tiffany felt a sense of pride wash over her. It wasn't just about the changes they were making in the company. It was about the way she was shaping her own future, taking control of her destiny. She wasn't just an employee anymore. She was a leader, a woman who had proven that she could rise above her circumstances and make a difference in the world. And for the first time in a long while, Tiffany felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Months had passed since Tiffany made the decision to join Bradley's initiative. The transformation within the company was noticeable, but the changes within Tiffany herself were even more profound. She had found herself not just involved in the project but leading parts of it, collaborating with people who respected her ideas and valued her insights. Bradley, once a distant and arrogant figure, had become more of a partner, one who actively sought her opinion and acknowledged her contributions. There were days when Tiffany still struggled to believe how much had changed, but there was no denying the sense of empowerment she felt now. As the project gained momentum, Tiffany was called to a meeting with Bradley and some of the top executives. The room was filled with energy, ideas being exchanged freely, as they discussed the next steps for the company's expansion. Tiffany, who had once been a quiet observer, now sat confidently at the head of the table, contributing her thoughts on how to reach new markets and diversify the company's offerings. Bradley caught her eye during the meeting, a look of approval on his face. Tiffany felt a surge of pride. It wasn't just her professional success she was proud of. It was the fact that she had finally been able to take control of her narrative, to show that she was more than the role people had tried to cast her in. After the meeting, Bradley asked her to stay behind. "You've been doing incredible work, Tiffany," he said, his voice warm but serious. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Tiffany's heart skipped a beat. She had gotten used to Bradley's straightforwardness, but something about his tone today made her curious. "What's going on?" she asked. Bradley hesitated before speaking. "I know we've made progress, but there's still a long way to go. And I've been thinking, you're ready for more. I want to offer you a higher position within the company." Tiffany blinked, taken aback. "A higher position?" she echoed, trying to process what he was saying. "Yes," Bradley said. "You've earned it. You've proven yourself, and I believe you can do even more. I want to offer you a role as Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion. I need someone who understands both the vision and the real work it takes to implement it, and I can't think of anyone better for the job." Tiffany sat back in her chair, her mind racing. It was a huge offer, one she never would have imagined a few years ago. This was the kind of position that could make a lasting impact, that could shape the company's culture in a way that had never been done before. But with the position came a level of responsibility she hadn't anticipated. The weight of it all settled in her chest, but she knew deep down that this was the opportunity she had been waiting for. "I appreciate the offer, Bradley," she said slowly, her voice steady. "And I'm honored. But I need to make sure I'm the right person for the job. This isn't just about a title. It's about making real change, and I want to make sure I'm ready for that." Bradley nodded, his eyes reflecting the same level of seriousness. "I know, and I believe you are ready. You've been the heart of this transformation from the beginning. This is your time." Tiffany took a deep breath, considering his words. She wasn't going to let fear hold her back. She had fought too long for a chance like this. She had fought for respect, for a place where her voice could be heard. And now she was being given the chance to lead. "I accept," she said, her voice firm and confident. Bradley smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I knew you would. I'm excited to see what you do with this opportunity." As Tiffany walked out of the meeting, a sense of purpose filled her chest. She had come so far, but now she was at the beginning of something even bigger. The path ahead was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. She was ready. The journey had only just begun, and she was determined to make it count, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been overlooked, for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. As the weeks turned into months, Tiffany settled into her new role with a sense of purpose that grew stronger each day. The position of Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion wasn't just a title for her. It was a mission. Bradley had kept his promise, and now with her at the helm, Tiffany was able to implement the changes she had fought for from the very beginning. The company started seeing tangible results. Tiffany introduced new hiring practices that ensured more diverse candidates were considered for top roles, and she worked tirelessly to create an environment where every employee, regardless of background, felt heard and respected. She wasn't just making changes on paper. She was reshaping the company culture from the inside out. There were challenges, of course. Not everyone agreed with the direction she was taking. Some of the older executives resisted her initiatives, holding on to outdated ways of thinking. But Tiffany wasn't one to back down. She knew that change was hard, and she was willing to fight for it. Every meeting, every conversation, she stood firm, using her voice to advocate for what was right. Slowly, she began to win people over. They saw the benefits of her approach, the way it made the company stronger, more innovative and more inclusive. Tiffany's leadership wasn't just about policies. It was about fostering an environment where people could be themselves and thrive. Outside of work, Tiffany still found herself reflecting on her journey. She often thought about the time when she had been just a waitress, invisible to the world, with dreams that seemed impossible to reach. But now, as she walked the halls of the company, she realized how far she had come. Her story was no longer defined by the labels others had placed on her. It was a story of resilience, of breaking barriers, and of proving that no matter where you come from, you have the power to change the world around you. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Tiffany sat in her office, reviewing some new proposals. The glow of the city lights outside her window illuminated the room, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to just sit in silence. She thought about her father, about how proud he would be to see her now, not just as his daughter but as a leader in her own right. Bradley had kept his promise to her, but Tiffany had kept a promise to herself too, to never forget where she came from, to always fight for what was right, and to ensure that no one would ever be overlooked again. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Bradley. "I'm proud of you. You've done more than I ever could have imagined." Tiffany smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment that went beyond any recognition or title. She had made a difference, and that was enough. As she glanced out the window once more, she knew that this was only the beginning. There was still work to be done, still so many people to help, but Tiffany was no longer just the woman in the background. She was the one shaping the future, and that was something no one could take away from her. As the months passed, Tiffany's impact within the company continued to grow. Her initiatives, which once seemed like hopeful ideas, were now becoming the backbone of a culture shift that was felt at every level of the organization. She had built programs that were not only about hiring diversity, but about creating a truly inclusive environment where people of all backgrounds felt seen, heard, and valued. It wasn't an easy road. There were setbacks, moments when it seemed like the work she was doing was being undermined or ignored. But Tiffany was no stranger to challenges. Every time she faced resistance, she reminded herself of the journey she had taken to get here. She had once been the invisible waitress, unnoticed and dismissed. Now she was leading change on a scale she had never thought possible. Bradley, too, was changing. The man who had once been solely focused on profit and power had become someone who genuinely cared about the welfare of his employees, his company, and the future they were all building together. There were still moments when Tiffany could see traces of the man he had been, the man who had brushed her aside without a second thought, but those moments were becoming fewer and further between. One afternoon, as they sat in a meeting discussing a new diversity training initiative, Tiffany glanced over at Bradley. He caught her eye and smiled, a rare but genuine smile that spoke volumes. "I wouldn't be here without you," he said quietly. Tiffany wasn't sure if he meant it as a compliment or an apology, but it didn't matter. She had always known that the real change wouldn't come from one person's efforts alone. It would take a community, a group of people working together for a common goal. "We're doing this together," she replied, her voice steady. "But you're the one who made it possible. You made the choice to listen." Bradley nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's a choice I'll never regret." As the conversation shifted back to the meeting, Tiffany felt a surge of pride. She had helped Bradley find his way, but she had also found her own. She had helped shape a future that was more equitable, more inclusive, and more just. Tiffany's phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. It was a message from her grandmother, as it always was after a particularly big day. "I'm proud of you, child. Never forget where you came from, and never stop making a difference." Tiffany smiled to herself, the weight of her grandmother's words settling into her heart. She had never forgotten where she came from, and she never would. It was her past that had shaped her into the woman she was today. And now she was making her mark on the future. Later that evening, as Tiffany sat in her apartment, she reflected on everything that had led her to this point. She thought about the quiet moments, the challenges, the breakthroughs, and the victories, both big and small. She thought about her father, about how proud he would be to see her now. Tiffany had walked through the fire of doubt and adversity, and come out stronger on the other side. But her journey wasn't over. There was more to be done, more changes to make, more people to help. The road ahead was still long, but Tiffany was ready for whatever came next. She was no longer just a woman working behind the scenes. She was a leader, someone who had the power to change the world. And that power was hers to wield, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced. She had proven that anyone could rise, no matter their circumstances. The future was hers to shape, and she wasn't about to waste it.